All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Society for Science at User Research Facilities Roundtable on Navigating Research Security. I'm Dan Powers, Executive Director of SSURF, and SSURF is a nonprofit, nonpartisan professional organization with a mission to promote and serve the interests of the user facility community. And as such, we arrange roundtables to help convene experts and stakeholders to discuss topics of concern to the user facility community. We also strive to share and raise awareness of the best practices and challenges and the aspirations and, of course, the discoveries of the nation's network of user facilities across various federal agencies. Today's roundtable will address the challenges and options for that are necessary for research security protocols. Our expert panel is going to be moderated by Margot Merkel, the VP of Federal Affairs for Space, Energy, and Science at Digital Science. Margot will introduce our panelists, who will provide brief presentations and then lead into an open discussion with everyone. And I'll step back and watch for questions in the chat there and bring them into the discussion as needed. We'll end promptly at 2 p.m. Eastern and look forward to the discussion. So Margot, over to you.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you so much. And I am Margot Merkel. As Dan said, I'm a VP at Digital Science. I recently come from the Department of State, where I worked for 15 years in various R&D efforts, including establishing the Center for Analytics. So I'm thrilled to welcome you to this session today on research security, a topic that continues to evolve rapidly and intersect directly with our work. Today's panel brings together leading voices with deep experience across policy, compliance, intelligence, and scientific program management. I'll introduce them briefly, starting with Aaron. So we have Aaron Melville, who is Assistant Vice President of Research Security at Carnegie Mellon University. He brings critical insights from intelligence and policy worlds, and he's truly now helping to bridge the gap between national security and the academic research enterprise. Aaron also is serving as an advisor at PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Lab, where he works with federal sponsors on global research security export control best practices, policy, and outreach efforts. He previously served as PNNL's Technology Protection Officer and Empowered Official. Aaron has also taught in academia and serves on several nonprofit boards. So thanks so much for being here, Aaron, and thanks for taking the time to join us.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Josh VanderVeen. Josh joins us from a skiff, so we will not see him on camera. But he is deeply embedded in the operational side of research security, particularly within the Department of Energy complex. Josh currently serves as the Director and Senior Counterintelligence Officer at Kansas City National Security Campus, or KCNSC. In this role, Josh supports the Department of Energy's Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, and the KCNSC by driving strategic vision, planning for identifying and mitigating threats to the KCNSC. Josh has worked in counterintelligence for 20 years in a number of different capacities within Department of Defense and the intelligence community. And then finally, our third panelist today is Heidi Becker. She also hails from Digital Science. She is a product manager for Dimensions Research Security. Since 2018, Heidi has worked closely with both academic and federal partners on how to leverage Dimensions for research security. She knows where theory meets practice and where real tensions lie for real researchers navigating the ever-evolving requirements regarding research security. She has spearheaded the development of the Dimensions Research Security product, which is now prolific. It is utilized in academic and government institutions across the US, the UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia. She joined us in digital science with a background in planning and evaluation from a major private science funder and has spent many years in state government. So we welcome Heidi. Thanks all for being here. Such a robust set of experience in our panel. I'm really excited to hear what everyone has to offer. So with that, I will jump right into the panelists. Each will give about a 10-minute overview, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Feel free to share any questions or comments that you have in the chat. We'd love to have an open discussion during this session today. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Aaron. Take it away.
Great. So first of all, thank you everybody for being here. It's nice to see some old friends and familiar faces, people who have worked together in the past. As I've thought about this, I'm in a new role at Carnegie Mellon. I started at Carnegie Mellon as the AVP this week. I've thought about this group of people and understanding what goes on at a lot of the user facilities at the national labs. I recognize that the user facilities actually have very robust security protocols in place at most locations. So I really wanted to focus a little bit about how we can build a research security program with some practical steps, keeping in mind the academic sector that we're often dealing with at the user facilities, and also bringing together a little bit of a perspective from the universities into this conversation. So just some common challenges that universities face, and most research institutions faces, that we're dealing with a broad spectrum of technologies that are being developed. You know, when I was at PNNL, I used to say that we would work on anything from candy coatings to nuclear technologies, and that's true. And that makes it very difficult for research security professionals to really wrap their hands around what is significant, what's not significant. Research projects can tend to be short-lived, and researchers themselves can bounce from project to project and space to space. The current nature of research is also very much international and collaborative. And as a result, we tend to see lots of communication channels into and outside of our organizations. So for example, just learning here at CMU, for example, I'm on a Google chat, a Slack channel, and Teams conversations all at the same time. So there's lots of ways that information and technology can slip out. Terms like export control also can be confusing, especially as that's maybe part of your research security portfolio. So making sure that there's some good understanding of where the boundaries are is important. Incentives are often sometimes misaligned. If I was in industry, and I'm an engineer, and I have a technology I'm working on, if I was to reach out and collaborate with somebody outside of our organization, if I didn't have very strict contracts, non-disclosure agreements in place, or I just started collaborating, I might get fired, right? I've got a very strong financial incentive to protect that technology. Whereas on university campuses, especially in fundamental research spaces, the opposite is sometimes true. They are incentivized to collaborate and work together, and are often rewarded for that collaboration. So the incentive structure is a little bit different when it comes to considering the research security risk. Lots of training and awareness issues are going to be ongoing. Knowing when a technology might be risky, it can be a little bit tricky, especially when we're dealing in emerging technology spaces. And so it's critically important to know when to raise our hand when we've got new technology risk. And then some of the organizations we're dealing with in the user facilities may or may not be aware of government technology controls, for example, like the DOE S&T matrix. Those things just are not commonly discussed. And then lastly, one of the other concerns is just there's a lot of shared and open lab space, and knowing who's in and out of the laboratories, at least on university campuses, can be tricky. And at the user facilities, that may be an issue to consider as well. But when it comes to creating a security culture, I think we just need to recognize that it's not just going to happen. Right? You really need to make a concerted effort to develop some sort of outreach and training program to make sure that people within your organization understand what the expected behaviors are. And really, culture begins with what we believe is important. And ultimately, it finds expression in how we and our staff behave. So when it comes to like establishing a research security program, and again, most of the user facilities do very well, some things I would highlight. We need to be very clear in what our mission is. A lot of us operate in silos, and oftentimes that inter-organization collaboration about and making sure we understand what's going on can be difficult. I would suggest you create a clear vision on what it is that you're trying to accomplish within your research security program. And that you spend some time evaluating your organization, both from an internal perspective and an external perspective. Spend some time benchmarking with your peers and having those honest questions with yourselves about where your risk patterns might lie. It's important, again, to work with key internal stakeholders, recognize some characteristics of successful organizations. And this next bullet point I really want to highlight, try your best to understand the research life cycle from project concept to project closeout, and understand, what a research security office's role will play in each step, but also be clear in what systems are going to be impacted, what policies and procedures may be involved, and what the project role might play in that phase of the research life cycle. Next, I would suggest, especially as you're looking to improve your program, gather as much data as possible and try to make data-driven decisions rather than decisions that are based on your gut. It helps really drive a risk-based approach. Once you gather some data, I would also look at developing what I call business rules. So look at the regulatory environment and what the requirements are there, but also look at your institutional requirements and any contractual requirements that you have, and develop rules that are going to make sense for your organization. In doing so, I think you can find opportunities to alleviate and reduce redundancies and break down those silos where you can work together. After you develop some business rules, I'll also suggest you conduct a gap analysis to see where you can improve, and then propose fixes, again, using a risk-based approach. In organizations that I've done to in the past, we actually tried to monetize what our annual risk is. And then when we came to evaluate and propose fixes, we would look at what the cost of those fixes would be and apply a simple ROI analysis to help us prioritize what investments we need to be making in the future. So I'm going to skip a conversation on the mission statement. But for me and my organization here at Carnegie Mellon, this is our vision right now. We want to develop a compliance program that's efficient, effective, easy, ethical, and evolving. For us, that's going to be our guiding star. And the decisions that we make, if they aren't driving us to be more efficient, meaning we're reducing the amount of research, communication, and confusion that's out there, and any uncertainty, we're going to try to avoid that. We want to make sure it's effective. And if the proposed fixes aren't effective, we need to think of alternatives. We want to make sure that the tools that we developed are easy, meaning that they're easy not only for the compliance professional to deploy and use, but easy for the researchers to interface with to, again, reduce the amount of friction. That's that compliance bog down is a big complaint anywhere we're engaging with researchers. We want to make sure we're ethical. We're not going to cut corners. We're going to follow the law, and we're going to do the right thing every time. And lastly, we want to make sure we have a program that's evolving. I'd like to thank my friend Brendan for that one. These programs, the environment is changing rapidly, and we need to be able to build systems in place that can quickly adapt to the ongoing changes in the regulatory environment. A lot of times we're asked about, well, what's the risk? And I try to simplify this down really easy as I engage with my researchers and my other offices. When I look at the regulations, a lot of times the regulations are pointing to risk areas around people and organizations. I call these Ps. We're going to look at sanctions lists, and we're going to look at credit risk and all of the other things that make up a good picture for who it is that we're dealing with. We're going to look at our property and our parts. So that's the equipment that we're utilizing within our laboratory space, and understand what the the technology transfer risk or the intangible technology transfer risk might be for people having access to them. But we also need to understand what the risks are associated with sharing that risk, or sharing those pieces of equipment or property with our colleagues. We want to look at programs, and not only the research programs. I'm also thinking software. We need to understand what our programs are doing and what their end use is going to be, but we also need to understand there are lots of export control considerations and research security considerations about the software that's being developed. Next, we want to look at paper. When I think paper, I'm thinking again that intangible technology, that the blueprints, the drawings, the schematics, the know-how on how to produce sensitive and emerging technologies. And we need to understand what the purpose for those technologies is going to be. If a technology has potential nuclear end use or military end use, we need to be aware of that, especially in these emerging fields. We need to know where this research is happening when we think about places. So where it's happening, not only on our campus, where it's happening virtually, or where in the world it might be happening and where that technology might be going. That allows us, again, to assess some of the political risk and the sanctions risks that's out there. The next one is payments. Unfortunately, there are lots of sanctioned banks out there. During the course of my career, I've actually found that probably half of my leads have come as we've been screening payment transactions. And the last P is product. U.S. Department of Commerce has a product rule, meaning that if you got a certain amount of technology based on U.S. technology, you might have some export control considerations you need to consider there. So as we think about those risk areas, we can also think about ways to mitigate things, right? We can develop policy and procedures. We can make sure that we're doing adequate planning. We can look at protections, making sure we have both physical and electronic protections in place. We may need to seek permissions. So if we need to go and work with licensing authorities in our governments, we can do that. Or we may need to get internal permissions to deviate from policy. Sorry, screen's blocking my view. So partnerships, we want to, again, work on internal and external partnerships to make sure that we're driving good communication and we're understanding what everybody's doing. But especially ideally, if we've got a university that we're working with, that our compliance professionals are working with their compliance professionals in a way so that we mutually understand what the restrictions might be. And lastly is preaching, right? We want to get out and we want to talk a lot about what it is that we're doing in a research security environment. Make sure that, again, we're trying to drive that culture change forward so that people can buy in. And, you know, it happens one convert at a time. And once you've got one convert to research security, they start telling other people. It's a slow turning thing, but over time, your organizations will see the fruits of that effort. I think generally speaking, the DOE labs, again, understand fairly well what the regulatory environment looks like. But if you're not familiar with NSPM 33 and its implementation guide, I would spend a little bit of time getting to understand what the expectations are going on currently. I would also try to get involved with the NSF secure community. That has been stood up recently to help drive some standardization on research security practices across the country. In addition to that, for situational awareness, we are starting to see research security consortia pop up across the world. I've worked with research security consortia in Africa, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And so there's really a communities coming together to drive some best practices for us. And then I would suggest you highly monitor regulators and political leadership. For example, the recent report coming out of the U.S.-China Commission it's called The Fox and the Hen House, really gets into and dives into some of the risks that they see concerning collaborative research with unauthorized Chinese entities on university campuses. And that just came out last week, so it should be easy to find. I think, again, if we're looking from a DOE user lab facility, we also need to understand, I think, what the university views on NSDD 189 is. A lot of the universities across the country have a fundamental research only policy, meaning they're only going to take research that is basic and applied in science and engineering, the results of which are ordinarily published and shared broadly within the scientific community, right? That's kind of where a lot of them stopped. But that's distinguished a lot from, again, proprietary research that might have national security considerations. So it's important to understand when technology is shifting from fundamental research to controlled research. One thing I would highlight is that many universities across the country consider any restriction on publications or foreign national access fundamental research killers. And they are hesitant to engage with user facilities that have things like the DOE FMVA or Foreign National Access Program in place. So finding ways that you can reach out to your university partners and helping them break down and understand the purpose of the Foreign National Access Programs and how you may or may not see that as the same light that they do as fundamental research killers. Many are hesitant to engage with user facilities currently because of their university policies. So it's an opportunity, again, to conduct some outreach to enhance the availability of access to the facilities. Again, aligning facilities with users, I would again continue to follow applicable orders and screening processes at your institutions, but also try to understand your users' institutional policy and practices, in particular on research security and export control. Try to connect your professionals with their professionals so that they can start developing a good relationship. Make sure that you provide local site training on security topics of the users. Sometimes that is overlooked. We train our staff, but sometimes the users may not necessarily be aware of everything that's going on. But also make sure that the users are aware of their host and their sponsor and their responsibilities to them as users at the facility. And next, making sure that we provide enough adequate time and resources and awareness for hosts to adequately monitor user access. This can be a challenge. I know that at some user facilities I've seen in the past, you might have one host trying to monitor dozens of users at their facility. And then again, recognize that government-owned facilities do have screening resources that the research institutions might not have. So as you're coming across situations that the university you're working with might not be aware of, it would be entirely appropriate, again, as you built those relationships with the research security folks at the users themselves, to be able to reach out and help them understand where they may be missing things. So that's all I have. I know it was quick and dirty, but we'll go ahead and turn it over to the next panelist.
Yep, thanks so much, Aaron. And Aaron just recently authored a chapter entitled Establishing a Research Security Office from a Compliance Officer's Perspective. So we got a little bit of a preview of that, I assume. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right, Josh, over to you.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Josh VanderVeen. I'm the Senior Counterintelligence Officer at the Kansas City National Security Campus. I appreciate being here. So I went out and got a fresh haircut and everything, and I intended to be on the screen. I was really excited, and I was going to go to one of our other facilities where I could be on camera, and literally there was a car on fire in the parking lot, and they told us to stay in the building. So I'm stuck in a skiff. I'm not purposely hiding my face. So I appreciate it either way. So kind of what I want to cover is why researchers and research organizations should take research security seriously overall, and just kind of how, at least from my perspective, my team and I have worked within just our organizational constructs to ensure appropriate mitigation and collaboration takes place throughout the full spectrum of research and development projects here at the campus. So I want to start first because I can't be a CI guy and tee up kind of a CI awareness message. So Aaron talked about the training and awareness piece. That is extremely, extremely essential for what we do to drive change and to drive just overall kind of intentional awareness in the risk space. So in the research space, sorry. So threat awareness obviously is key to inform risk measurement and subsequent risk acceptance. We have many kind of touch points that we cover, but in our organization, really it comes down to the principal investigator, the researcher, that we consider as the first line of defense. They're the ones that are engaging and dealing with any partners that we have in the research space, whether it's universities or other private entities or public entities. So some of the areas that we kind of look at and focus is where's the research going, kind of looking at the policies behind the technology we might be working with, what could be potentially breakthrough technologies, matching that up with what Aaron already mentioned, the S&T or science and technology matrices that we use in DOE. And then we kind of assess whether we're dealing with fundamental and applied. So I'm speaking to an audience that's very familiar with this kind of field. We look at the foreign government views. So from a counterintelligence perspective, specifically in my office, we want to understand what are some of the foreign governments, both friends, traditional friends, allies, and then even our adversaries looking at. What is their view of our funded research? And potentially, what is their level of interest if we were to conduct research in a specific area? And then we work with some of our other components across the KCNSC, looking at CUI or controlled unclassified information. We also try to explore the ability to use classified facilities at universities, or if we can push certain research to in-house strictly and just try to pull in other entities and clear them and vet them to bring them in. So we do have that luxury compared to some other places that may not. So we do try to exercise that where we can. We are really good at conducting a review and analysis of our own individuals who are going to be working on projects, because we want to make sure there's a level of trust and understanding with our engineers or our scientists or researchers, and that they're going to fully comprehend what the threat looks like and how that plugs into the risk overall risk assessments and risk appetites of what we do in our programs. So a piece of that we look under there, under any research development project, we look at risk reward. We are also looking at options, maybe if there's a project or program or technology that they're looking at researching that's high risk, is there a way to kind of pivot into something slightly different to push that more into fundamental if they want to do that. And then we also always ask the question of our PIs, our researchers, and our partners, whether that's in export control, our legal departments, like what keeps you up at night, and what keeps you up at night specifically with maybe a project that we are evaluating before it goes out for approval. Those are really good, healthy conversations internally to have. And it does kind of, you know, I believe in that kind of semper gumby. It offers some flexibility to where we can pivot to look at other alternatives or options and offer those up to a researcher. So from a CI perspective, again, why do we take research security seriously? I think I'm hoping I'm insulting your intelligence when I'm telling you some of this stuff. But believe it or not, I know we all deal with it. There are times where we deal with folks that just don't understand what the threat is. So our job is to always convey that in a way that is not from a position of the sky is falling, we need to be scared of every shadow or anything like that. No, and we're also not the office of no, we're the office of enablement. So the threat to external R&D for us primarily stems from foreign targeting of key technologies and research institutions. That comes from the DNI, FBI. There's plenty of reports we can go out there, and that is not to sell anything. All it is for us, fortunately we're not selling anything, is just simply driving reporting and understanding of, we do know that we are often targeted across the spectrum of the U.S. government and private industry, and then we try to get specifics into what that threat really looks like. If you want to talk from a business perspective, the threat with external R&D, we have seen through FBI report that came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago, about $600 billion in annual losses to IP theft, specifically to China each year. And I kind of get tired of talking about China all the time, but unfortunately they have been the most prevalent in this space. So we do end up on that China topic quite a bit. And then we also know that nearly a quarter of all foreign efforts to obtain sensitive or classified information have been through academic institutions. That's according to the Department of Defense. So primarily looking at those independently, it's very easy to convey, at least to our folks internally, like, here's the threat. This is why this is important. This is why we have an external research decision tree, and that we sit down and we evaluate from soup to nuts you know, what the risks are to any of our external R&D going out. So other things that we try to touch on, and you know, as far as what foreign adversaries want, what they get into, we provide that. Everything from budgets and expenditures to pre-publication, pre-classified research that might be fundamental in name, but have some, strings or threads back to potential applied, or for us even nuclear-related research, right? So scientific, economic, any development goals, primarily at Kansas City National Security Campus. We are a production agency for the nuclear security enterprise, so we're always looking at, what are our adversaries interested about? What are we putting out there through different websites that are open source that people can see? What are our spending habits on programs? What are our gaps that have been identified through open source reporting? That kind of stuff. That's on that side. On the research and development side, we want to make sure if we're doing research that could touch any programs, we're not identifying any future concepts or any future projects that may be going on. So again, going back, stepping away from the threat and the adversary piece, that's just the importance of having a security program. Like, how do we work with others? Not just standing in front of people and articulating what that threat is. That's a big piece of it. But also figuring out ways to, again, enable research projects to be funded and to be able to work with certain entities. That would include both allied, friendly foreign nationals, even sensitive country, and then we also look, of course, at those countries of risk when we're conducting our evaluation. There is no real implicit no until you get to, kind of the big 4 countries of risks that are pretty obvious. We have some more additional scrutiny with that. But we always like to tell people, if it's a project, it's fundamental, we want to make sure that you understand, if you bring that to the table, we'll give it the same rigor and same evaluation regardless if it is a U.S. entity you're dealing with versus various foreign entities. Now, we have a graded approach to that, but we are using the same risk management framework to ensure we're protecting our people, our technologies, and our research. So through the whole process, we've really developed a pretty, what we feel is a robust program, a robust process to work with executive leadership, our legal and compliance office, human resources, physical security if we're bringing folks on site, IT and cyber when we're touching software or other hardware programs that are going to be potentially touching any of our networks, facilities infrastructure, our health and safety, chemical, all that kind of stuff too, if we're dealing with any of that chemical engineering or research, communications, external relations, and then if you have one, I'm extremely biased, but use your counterintelligence office. If you don't have an entity that does CI, find one. We are worth our weight in gold. I got a bunch of friends looking for jobs, so I'm pitching for them right now. So I'm kind of kidding, but seriously, we do. We're able to kind of tie the intelligence community components and other previous held knowledge, even and other relationships that we have across different intelligence community and law enforcement entities to potential derogatory information or other entities of risk or other threats. We're able to kind of tie all of these different components together in the evaluation process and hopefully give us a greater picture and have a more confident risk assessment as we go through the external R&D evaluation process. So some of the things like I mentioned just briefly, and I'll get into it just briefly, we developed a risk management framework a few years back, and we totally stole this thing from multiple entities. We looked at what other agencies were doing, kind of how do you evaluate risk? Because like I mentioned before, we talk a lot about China specifically, or foreign entities in general. And what we didn't want to do is become so tied to China is the threat, they're the primary threat, and completely ignore even U.S. entities that could be potentially a threat. All right, so we built this framework to evaluate holistically and not just focus or even weight the foreign aspects of it greater than some of the other riskier aspects. And we were able to kind of plug in with other entities and develop this overall kind of framework to be able to stand in front of our engineers and our scientists and say, yes, you can work with this entity that maybe is sensitive, but through our evaluation process, we have scored it at this. And then here's some mitigations to ensure that we're securing and protecting our information. And that has been a really healthy relationship now, where maybe in the past people would see counterintelligence or security walk in the room and they'd be like, oh, great, now I'm going to have to figure out a way to work around, security's obvious questions about I'm working with foreign nationals. No, it's not an implicit no. It's, hey, let's look at this and figure out how to mitigate some of the issues, the risks, or even the threats. So I will say another thing that we did add into beyond just establishing relationships and developing different networks and building that risk management framework, we were able to successfully apply technology and tools that proved extremely beneficial to our analysis of threats to our external R&D and working with others. So we don't have a huge team by any means. We're relatively small in this space across really the DOE and then other agencies that are peer agencies. So being able to collect and aggregate information through the use of various commercial tools has really been a game changer for us. We're able to set up alerts, and we're able to do different things that, would back in, just 5-6 years ago, we would spend hours, if not days, evaluating one or two research projects at a time, where now we're able to kind of bring that down. We get basically a pretty good picture, a good threat picture to evaluate the risk for a program just within a couple hours, a lot of times, just doing our evaluations. Now, we do have the luxury of also not just using the commercial tools. We can plug into internal databases across the DOE and Kansas City, and then we also have partnerships that we're able to share information across. That would be other law enforcement, FBI, IC members, other counterintelligence field offices within the DOE, and it really helps us, it enables us really to get a greater degree of certainty within our threat analysis and overall risk assessment. So that's a lot to kind of throw in there in 10 minutes. I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and you can see part of my number up there, but I'm always happy, as I just mentioned, being able to leverage partnerships and share information across different entities has been a game changer for us too. So after we're done here, I'm happy to share any of my information to, kind of grow in those partnerships in the future. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. And I agree, sharing best practices across agencies is always super helpful. I see a question regarding LLMs in the chat. Feel free to add questions. Maybe not as hard as that one, but other questions if you see fit, and then we'll get to them at the end. Heidi, over to you.
Okay. I'm going to try to make this quick. Really appreciate being here just to give you a little bit of perspective from digital science and kind of how we've developed a tool to help support all of the efforts that Aaron and Josh talked about. So briefly want to talk about kind of our approach to research security. So we're blessed at digital science with a vast database in dimensions of available research information and data enrichment. And I just want to harken back to something that Aaron said earlier about, one of the components is really data gathering. This is a piece of that. It's not all of it. But in order to leverage the enormous amount of information that we have at Dimensions, we really needed to build a research security solution. We really needed to understand what the relevant data points are, especially in the context of changing regulations that we've all referred to. This is a rapidly developing space. So we need to understand these data points, and we need to understand the context in which people would like to analyze them. We also wanted to allow for flexible risk assessments. I love the fact that Josh talked about, this is not an automatic no. This is about how do we provide you with data that allows you to make those kinds of assessments, consider what the potential risk might be and how you might mitigate it, for example. We also wanted to be incredibly transparent. So everything we provide, you can look at the source documents that inform the data points that we provide to you. We also think it's important to provide auditable review documentation, and I'll talk about what I mean by reviews in a minute. But it's really important as you go through all of these processes, which again vary from institution to institution. The regulations change from different agencies, never mind globally, to be able to have documentation that you can refer to that's point in time that demonstrates what you did in terms of due diligence, or risk mitigation. We also feel like it's incredibly important that we're a responsible partner. We're not going to reach conclusions. This is a very complex area. Our intent is to provide you with data that you need to inform recommendations, risk mitigation plans, and ultimately the decisions that you need to make to conduct your programs. We continue to drive innovation in this space. This is based on extensive user and regulatory research. We have talked to dozens upon dozens of research security professionals at both academic institutions and at government agencies to inform the product and what we provide to you. Again, our whole mission is to make your lives easier. Briefly want to just talk about what kind of data we're talking about. So the Dimensions database, it's an incredibly enormous database of research activity related data. So not going to belabor every single number on the screen, but just to give you a sense of the volume of data that we're talking about. We're also, in addition to just putting all of this data in one place, we're doing an incredible amount of data enrichment. So we're talking about disambiguating institutions and organizations and companies, geotagging them, linking all of these various outputs together, disambiguating people. There's enormous value in not just having the data, but having enriched data that makes it easy to analyze and access. The research security product, so Dimensions Research Security was built again I started in 2017, 2018, working with institutions. So we're using Dimensions for research security specifically. So we've got a really good understanding of the kinds of data points that are particularly helpful as you look at both organizational potential risks. So how can we help you be proactive? I'm going to go through quickly just an example to help better illustrate this in a second. But we're looking for things like, are your researchers using different affiliations in these various publications, grants, patents that may not be disclosed to you, that may be connected to restricted entities? Are you aware of collaborations with restricted entities or countries of concern? Again, you might be, everything might be fine, but to the extent that you're not aware of them, it's very important that they're on your radar. Potentially undisclosed funding. Are you aware of the support that your researchers may be getting from sources that you might want to have a closer look at? Again, the key here is, was this disclosed or not to you? And how do you verify that? So that's where we come in and help. We also we have a vast patent database. We look at IP transfer. So do you have researchers at your organization that maybe have left that are then filing patents in other jurisdictions? That's based on research that was taxpayer funded in the United States. That's on an organizational level. I would say the overwhelming use of Dimensions Research Security is to conduct some basic due diligence on researchers. So these could be people that you are collaborating with, you're going to hire, they're visiting. A number of different use cases for these reviews. Again, we're going to surface as many data points as we can to help you conduct a risk assessment specifically. So we're not looking at things like how many times they were cited, what's their H index. We're looking at very specific data points. As I mentioned before, one of the things that we wanted to make functionality-wise very obvious is that how you decide what your risk configuration looks like is up to you. We're not going to dictate it to you. So you can select whether you want to look for flags on a country level, countries of concern. We have a number of different lists, which I'll get to in a second, that you can use to flag content. So am I affiliated with a listed entity? Have I been affiliated in the past? Am I collaborating with? Am I being funded by? So there are a number of different ways you can customize these reviews to suit your needs. I'm not going to go over, just in the interest of time, because I'm very interested in the discussion, super detail about the product itself, but these are the types of things that we're helping you to surface very quickly. Talking about customized risk assessment, so there is a number of ways you can, and again, this is very much in line with our philosophy. We want to make this flexible. We know this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. So you can do this in a number of different ways in Dimensions Research Security. Just to walk you through how this works in practice with this product. So some of you may have seen this story that came out December of 2024. So this was a settlement agreement related to a NASA grant that was issued to the University of Delaware. This resulted in a $700,000 penalty that the that the University of Delaware had to pay. What I like about this story, not that this happened, was that they were very clear about the elements of failure to disclose. So one was employment at a Chinese university that was not disclosed. Two was participation, very long way to say a talent recruitment program in this text. And three was a grant that this PI was actually awarded from China, again, that was not disclosed. It was the failure to disclose that was an issue specifically. So in this, in Dimensions Research Security, this is the organizational view. So here we're looking at, this is the kind of query you can do. I want to know at my organization, for my researchers that are publishing or working in engineering, how many of those have also been publishing with an affiliation in China? So without even knowing the name of this researcher, pretend this is where we're starting, just by doing this kind of analysis, their name pops up immediately in this analysis. So we could have flagged the use, we could have been aware of the use of the affiliation in China. Now we're going into an example of a researcher profile in Dimensions Research Security. Again, the user is picking what to flag. Here we've elected to flag all activity related to China. I'm going to have a sip of water. So again, you can see we break down what we flag, again, according to what you would like us to flag, into a number of different categories. But looking at the terms of that disclosure, that settlement with the University of Delaware, one, employment at a Chinese university. We take all of the affiliations that a researcher has used, whether it be on a grant record or a publication record, and combine them and map them out over time. So just looking at the use of affiliations, we can see for a period of time that the researcher was also using affiliation with an organization based in China, again, potentially not disclosed. They're highlighted in red because we elected to filter to China. Don't do that by default. The second element of the settlement, the failure to disclose, was this participation in talent recruitment funding program out of China. We look for keywords related to a large number of these programs in the funding and acknowledgement sections of publications. And I would, again, being a responsible partner here, this is an indication, this is an indicator. This funding was acknowledged on a publication where this researcher was a co-author. Does it definitively mean that that researcher received that funding? We can't tell you that. This should be the basis of having a conversation with your researcher to clarify this, to say, we noticed that this funding was acknowledged. We need you to confirm, for example, that you are not yourself participating in this program. But these are indicators that help you back up these conversations. You have some data-driven approach, as Aaron alluded to earlier. We're looking at the data. We're not looking at the background of the researcher. We're looking at the data. Third element in the settlement agreement was the non-disclosure of a grant from the National Natural Science Foundation of China. If we look at this researcher's profile, we're looking at funders across multiple types of records and dimensions, including awarded grants. We have 3 grants indexed in dimensions where this researcher was listed as a PI or co-PI. So all of this in a very short fashion to say, this is how we built the product to help to identify quickly and efficiently these types of potentially concerning issues, so that you can, have full transparency. You can have the conversations that you need to have with your researchers or your funders about how you want to approach risk mitigation, for example, and just again to make sure that your disclosures are complete. We want to give you a efficient way to verify disclosures and surface potential areas of concern that might require further risk mitigation. Just a point of pride, if you'll excuse me, since working on this product, obviously, as Margot alluded to, we now have users and clients around the world, including at federal agencies and universities. This continues to expand, and as we continue to expand, that means we have more people to talk to help make this product even better going forward. And just a final note in terms of what's coming soon, one of the overwhelming demands we had in terms of this product was, this is great, it's a dashboard, I can't integrate it with internally held data. I can't perform reviews at scale, particularly for our clients who are funding agencies that need to process high, incredible volumes of applications or reviews. We are coming out, it should be released at the end of the month, with an API for research security, specifically to help our clients with these needs. Again, integrating this data with your internally held data and performing reviews at scale. It's still flexible, still allows you to define your own risk parameters, but it helps support this larger ecosystem of research security efforts and controls.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the panelists for being here and taking the time to join us today. And Josh in particular for taking the time to blow up a car so that he doesn't have to join us on camera. We appreciate all of the efforts. Let's jump into a couple of questions as we don't have a ton of time here. I see that Alexi in the chat has asked a question regarding the legal and regulatory definition of data and how it may or may not have evolved as it should to account for post-LLM realities. And they pose a solution here that is a possible definition of data. And Alexi, chime in if I'm not summarizing the question appropriately. But the proposed definition is any LLM that is trained in part or in whole on any taxpayer-owned digital asset is subject to the same export controls as the protected digital asset. Now, to our panelists, do you think that this proposal poses challenges as a new regulatory definition of data?
So I think I'll jump in on this one. So regulations are hard to write, and there are a number of organizations. For example, you've got the Emerging Technology Technical Advisory Committee, headed up by the Office of Tech Evaluation of the Department of Commerce. They very much look closely at technologies that are being developed and are being considered for additional export controls, including LLMs and new data and the resulting tools that come from that. They are working through the process now that I'm, as far as I'm aware, of looking at these kinds of things. And so if you pay attention to what's going on at the tax and in the Federal Register, these kinds of proposed definitions are actually very valuable for them as they're considering amending the regulations to include things. It can be a pretty slow process. But one thing I would highlight, and I think the questioners raises a really good thought. A lot of times we operate in an environment where if our technology is not on a control list, we don't need to control it. And that's kind of the mentality. But being cognizant of new technologies that are being developed and being willing to raise your hand and say, hey, this might have some national security or economic security, political security kind of concerns, environmental security concerns, it's entirely appropriate to reach out to your research security or your export control office and work to submit a CCATS through the Department of Commerce or commodity jurisdiction determination through the Department of State to at least get that technology on their radar so that they can start to consider wrapping some sort of export controls around that technology moving forward.
That's great. Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
And I think I'll jump to another question that was posed to us in advance, and I think is pertinent to all, and Aaron touched on this a little bit in his presentation. What emerging issues have we seen recently surfaced from the current administration in terms of mandates or new findings? What are some specific things that we need to keep track of or conform to? Josh, do you want to start us with that one?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I just had somebody
That's
in my other
okay.
ear. I
That's
apologize.
okay. Or Heidi or Aaron, you can chime in as well. So what emerging issues have recently surfaced from the administration in terms of mandates or new findings?
I can jump back on this. I mean, I can take the easy road on this and just talk about, just the implementation of NISPOM 33. I don't want to necessarily delve into some of the other executive orders at this point because those are all touchy and movable. But I think when we talk about just the defining of research security alone was an important element to that. And then also looking at it from the standpoint of just declaring that we do know there have been intentional and deliberate use of the research environment by some of our foreign adversaries to aggregate for intelligence purposes. So NISPOM 33, some of the other initiatives, I know people don't want to touch on the China initiative a lot of times, but some elements of that have been used to push some other orders have been useful to an extent if you talk from a security perspective only, but may have in fact disrupted more of the research environment itself.
I think the other thing I might highlight is that there was some recent orders coming out on nuclear deployment development in trying to streamline and get things out into the community a little bit faster in terms of getting up increased capacity. That's gonna, I think, put a little bit of pressure on the user facilities as they're looking at new and novel energy production technologies, and the universities themselves as well, looking at how they might be able to contribute to that increased focus on nuclear and nuclear energy.
Yeah, I think, absent of specific regulations, I think, as everybody's alluded to, there's a growing community of practice around research security. And I think obviously that's partly informed by regulations, but I think, the overwhelming feeling I get globally is that we're all trying to do the right thing, however that's defined regulatorily. And if we can work together from both sides of, from the academic institution space and the federal agency space to work on collaborative solutions, I think it's only going to benefit everyone, regardless of where the regulations go.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll open it up to the floor if there's any other questions that anyone wants to ask verbally. Otherwise, we are
Margot,
happy to take questions offline, and we can stay for a couple of extra minutes after the formal panel ends to take any questions here.
thank you, Margot. This is Dan. We are up at time, so I want to thank everyone for joining us for the formal conversation. I believe the panelists can stay on for a little bit more. We can have what's in essence still conversational and an informal continuation of the discussion if people would like. But otherwise, let me give a thank you to everyone. And thank you definitely to each of the panelists. I really appreciate your insights and your presentations here to get this conversation started. I'll actually stop recording now. And sometimes that actually prompts additional discussion or questions as people are more comfortable feeling like they are having a more sort of internal conversation this way. But otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us. There'll be some new SSURF roundtables that you'll be invited to coming up over the next several weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks, Dan, for hosting us.
Yeah.